The music's sound depicted a fantasy rather than reality. The captain's actor detested the film so much that he dubbed it the Sound of Mucus behind the scenes. The main actress's dark hair became bright orange due to chemicals, causing a hair disaster. Instead, they had to bleach it blonde. In Austria, the cast endured 11 dreary weeks of rain. Not even the well-known opening sequence was enchanted. Helicopter winds slammed the actress 9 times into the ground. They made an effort to conceal this story from the public. It never occurred to Maria von Trapp that she would write books. She was raised by a strict uncle who detested the Catholic Church after losing her parents when she was a tiny child and being born on a train to Vienna in 1905. Paradoxically, Maria became a Catholic and joined Salzburg's Nonnberg Abbey. When she was moved from the monastery to serve as a governess for the daughter of widower naval commander Georg von Trapp, her life took yet another unexpected turn. On November 26, 1927, Maria married Georg, even though she was 25 years younger than him. Maria was encouraged to write down her life narrative by a friend after Georg passed away in 1947. Maria initially scribbled a few pages hastily in an attempt to demonstrate her lack of writing ability. Rather, she had a latent narrative ability. Her autobiography, Story of the Trapp Family Singers, was a bestseller in 1949. However, Maria subsequently chuckled at how she appeared to be a lovely angel in the musical rendition. People who knew her agreed with her when she stated she was nothing like that. Compared to the persona Julie Andrews subsequently portrayed, Maria was far more feisty, forceful, and unyielding. The narrative was already a smash in Europe before Hollywood ever touched it. The Trapp Family, a German film, came out in 1956. Hans Holt portrayed the Baron, while Ruth Luberick portrayed Maria. Despite not being a dazzling Hollywood production, it resonated with viewers who were still getting over World War II. Making millions of Deutsche Marks in Germany and even doing well in American theaters, the movie was an enormous hit. Hollywood initially had a very different idea for the Von Trapp narrative. The rights to the German films were purchased by Paramount Pictures in late 1956. They envisioned Audrey Hepburn in a straightforward English adaptation, who, following Roman Holiday and Sabrina, was already a tremendous celebrity. They even requested Vincent J. Dunhue, the TV director, to take over. However, Dunhue revealed something surprising to them after they had seen the German movie. He claimed that although the movie was mediocre, the narrative was too poignant for a typical picture. He requested that Mary Martin, a Broadway icon, star in the show. This new notion did not sit well with Paramount, particularly after Hepburn's unavailability caused the project to fail. Coincidentally, 20th Century Fox paid $1.25 million to acquire the rights in 1960. It was a bold decision, particularly considering the company was losing a lot of money on its problematic Cleopatra project. Although no one realized it yet, this gamble would shortly pay off. The concept began as something quite different, and eventually came together. The music was originally intended to be a straightforward drama, with a few German folk tunes thrown in. However, the well-known musical duo of Oklahoma, The King and I, Rodgers and Hammerstein, refused to perform it that way. They stated that they would only sign on if they were able to compose an entirely unique tune. Everything changed because of this audacious choice. It transformed the tale into a full-length musical and gave the world-beloved tunes like Do Re Mi and My Favorite Things. The Sound of Music was their last work together, since Oscar Hammerstein tragically died of stomach cancer 9 months after the Broadway debut. On November 16, 1959, the musical debuted and quickly gained popularity. It received 5 Tony Awards, including Best Musical, during its 443 performance run. More than $2 million worth of tickets had already been sold before the show's formal opening, which at the time was a Broadway record. Some adjustments were made when it came time to make it into a movie. To better suit the film, Richard Rodgers composed 2 brand new songs, Something Good and I Have Confidence. Robert Wise took a big gamble in 1964 when he began casting for The Sound of Music. Julie Andrews was not yet well known in Hollywood. A few executives from the studio were anxious. Although they appreciated her attractiveness, none was certain that crowds would come solely to see her. Wise was also not prepared to wager everything. He discreetly created a backup list that included more well-known and secure choices like Shirley Jones and Grace Kelly. However, he secretly had feelings for Andrews. Then everything changed one night. To Disney, Wise and screenwriter Ernest Lehman were given a behind-the-scenes glimpse to unfinished Mary Poppins sequences. It took them just a few minutes. "We should go sign this girl before someone else does," Wise remarked, turning to Lehman in a panic. For The Sound of Music, they awarded her a small contract of $225,000, and then another film. It was a wise choice. Despite signing, Julie wasn't quite convinced. "How will you take the sugar out of this story?" she asked Wise directly as they sat down. Wise knew he had chosen the proper Maria after just one inquiry. Neither he nor she want a cartoon representation of the figure. They decided to make the plot more grounded, relatable, and warm. On the opposite side of the cast, another conflict was simmering as Julie locked in the part of a lifetime. Christopher Plummer detested the thought of appearing in such a musical. He wasn't afraid to express his opinion that it was excessively sentimental and corny. He repeatedly declined the position of Captain von Trapp. Wise even began considering bringing in other well-known figures, such as Yul Brynner, Sean Connery, or Bing Crosby. However, Plummer was Wise's first priority. To alter his mind, he took a plane all the way to London. They agreed. Plummer might modify the captain in close collaboration with the authors. He desired Von Trapp to have a genuine emotional journey, more wit, and more edge. Plummer even requested a solo song to reveal the captain's inner turmoil. In the end he consented, but not before making a backstage joke about the film, which he dubbed The Sound of Mucus, and CNN to relieve tension. It was considerably more difficult to locate the 7 children who would portray the Von Trapp children. They needed children who could act, dance, sing, and had a sense of belonging. There were hundreds of auditions. Kurt Russell, Patty Duke, and even Mia Farrow were among the well-known individuals that tried out. Wise didn't think Farrow had the enthusiasm or dance abilities required for the role, despite her 3 auditions for Liesel. After showcasing his voice, Daniel Trujita, who portrayed Rolf, quickly earned the role. However, there was an odd turn. His character's tale ended when Rolf betrays Von Trapp's in the first scene he recorded. In order to transform Rolf from a naive, infatuated child into a seasoned young Nazi, he had to work backward. Although it wasn't simple, he succeeded. However, the actors had to undergo some startling bodily transformations behind the scenes, and not all of them were short-term. Just before filming, Julie Andrews, a natural brunette, had a hair catastrophe. Her dark hair was intended to be subtly highlighted, but the chemicals caused it to turn brilliant orange instead. They bleached and colored her hair blonde since they didn't have time to repair it correctly. Although it wasn't her natural appearance, it looked good on TV. Even worse was Daniel Trujita's experience. His black hair was repeatedly bleached to get the perfect Aryan appearance. He suffered irreversible hair damage as a result of the harsh chemicals. He later claimed that the treatments caused him to lose half of his hair, and it never regrows. Like a scar, it followed him long after the cameras stopped rolling, but it was a steep price to pay for a few months of filming. The residents of Salzburg weren't very happy with the music, even if it won hearts all across the world. The fact that the movie was being filmed in their backyard was mostly ignored by the townspeople. Later on, Peter Husty of the Salzburg Museum said that he was mostly unaware of the movie until he was an adult. The story's negative portrayal of Austrians during World War II, according to Salzburgers, was part of the issue. They felt that too many of the characters appeared to be Nazis, and it was too romantic. The fact that the filmmakers mixed together actual locales and pieced together fragments of several palaces to create the fictitious Von Trapp mansion only made things worse. Due to inquiries from visitors rather than personal recollections, many locals are still more familiar with the film today. Director Robert Wise and his team believed they would be finished in 6 weeks when they landed in Salzburg in early 1964. Rather, it became an 11-week dismal and rainy experience. Almost everything was wrecked by rain. Weeks passed between scenes that should have just taken a day. Because of the frequent rains, Do Re Mi alone required 9 sites and 2 full months to shoot. The team had to hurry inside to adjacent studios or little chapels if it poured too heavily, and to provide the illusion of a sunny day when sunshine was much required, they imported enormous lights from all around Europe. It became so terrible that almost all of the generators and lights on the continent had to be hired. It was also difficult to relocate and house 250 individuals. Stagehands, technicians, actors, you name it, were all part of the team. It was an absolute struggle to feed and shelter them, and the expenses skyrocketed as the timeline stretched. Furthermore, the children began maturing too quickly. During filming, Nicholas Hammond, who portrayed Friedrich, gained 6 inches. In order to maintain the plausible height discrepancies, Charmian Carr, who played Liesel, had to stand on boxes, while he first used lifts in his shoes before going barefoot. In order to avoid seeming drastically different on screen, local dentists had to create false teeth for Debbie Turner's character, Marta, who also lost her baby teeth during filming. Things got so out of control that they had extras dressed in summer attire, suffering in the bitter cold, as they filmed the main festival scene. The sequence where the children fall from a boat was one of the scariest to film. Kim Carruth, who was 5 years old when she played Gretel, was unable to swim. Only a few minutes prior to filming, Julie Andrews learned that she would need to save her. However, Andrews unintentionally slipped in the wrong direction as the boat tilted, and tiny Kim drowned. After being brought to safety, Kim drank water and ended up throwing up, but Andrews swam faster than ever before to get to her. She will always be afraid of water because of that day. Even Julie Andrews' lovely opening sequence, in which she spins on a mountain, wasn't as joyful as it seems. The wind from the helicopter's engines slammed her into the grass every time it flew by, a cameraman attached to the side. It occurred 9 times in all, repeatedly. After nearly every take, Andrews had to spit out hay and mud. To get the pilot to fly wider, she attempted to shout. However, he simply shouted again and continued to give her the thumbs up. While filming the iconic gazebo dance for 16 going on 17, Charmian Carr, who played Liesel, experienced her own misfortune. Her shoes' rubber soles were overlooked by the costume crew. She stumbled poorly on a leap, hurt her ankle, and smashed through a pane of glass. The staff hurried to find a stand-in for her. Carr, however, insisted on completing the sequence by herself. She pushed through the dance despite her injury, and in some of the images, the majority of spectators didn't even detect the bandage covering her ankle. Christopher Plummer, who portrayed Captain von Trapp, appeared to be taking a bit too much pleasure in Austria in the meanwhile. He frequently referred to the lovely tone of the film as the sound of mucus behind the scenes, which he detested. Rather than moping, he drank wine and local sweets to dull his displeasure. His outfits had to be removed and re-sewn since his waist had gotten so big. He later acknowledged that he was in fact intoxicated at the festival's poignant Edelweiss moment. In retrospect, Plummer characterized himself as a pampered young performer who failed to see the significance of his current chance. The young performers had their share of difficulties as well. They faced various difficulties in addition to Kim Carruth's near drowning. Even before they departed for Salzburg, 2 whole months of rehearsal were required to learn the synchronized bike riding scenario for Do Re Mi. It was difficult to sing and ride a bike at the same time, especially for kids. They were only allowed to work a few hours a day due to stringent child labor regulations, which made scheduling even more difficult for the team. In few instances, double casting was required to comply with requirements. Nonetheless, the music mostly relied on the original 7 children. The Sound of Music has never been easy for Christopher Plummer. He couldn't stomach it, despite the fact that the film gave him a global celebrity. He disliked even saying the name. Rather, he referred to it as S&M, or most memorably, The Sound of Mucus. He made fun of how romantic and syrupy he felt everything was in his book. He also didn't hold back in interviews. He once told The Hollywood Reporter that it made him shudder because it was so mushy and horrible. His portrayal of Captain von Trapp was the source of his greatest annoyance. Plummer believed that the part was like beating a dead horse since it was so dull and uninteresting. He didn't only moan though. He put a lot of effort into making Captain von Trapp more nuanced and serious. Plummer told director Robert Wise from Away that the role has to remain stern, clipped, and sharp-spoken. The emotional parts would only feel genuine rather than corny after all that roughness, Wise concurred. Plummer was even subsequently complimented by screenwriter Ernest Lehman, claiming that the film was improved by aiming for stronger sequences. Nevertheless, Plummer acknowledged that many of his most caustic remarks began as jokes at dull news conferences. However, they took things seriously when the media got its hands on them. The actress who played Maria, Julie Andrews, was well aware of the issues. Despite being nominated for an Oscar, she had serious reservations about the project. She was concerned at the moment that the narrative may quickly become a corny, ostentatious disaster. Everything was just right. The sweeping Rodgers and Hammerstein tunes, the charming children, and the mountain scenery, to make it all too sweet to bear. Before production ever began, Andrew got down with Christopher Plummer and Robert Wise to discuss how to get rid of the sugar. Plummer was essential to keeping the film grounded, she subsequently stated. His tough, no-nonsense demeanor provided her character with a genuine opponent. Their chemistry was remarkable because of their back-and-forth intensity. Andrews and Plummer had a strong friendship for decades, until his death. In spite of all the conflicts on set, she frequently said that the film would have been far too gentle without him. Plummer's singing was another unspoken issue that existed behind the scenes. He played Captain von Trapp flawlessly, but the studio didn't think his voice was powerful enough when he sang Edelweiss. In order to improve the song's tone and combine Plummer's voice, they discreetly, and without informing the audience, brought in a professional vocalist named Billy Lee. Nearly no one was aware of the reality for years. Only in 2023, over 60 years later, was Plummer's original uncut tape made available to the general audience. Plummer was 91 years old at the time of his death. Fans were given a taste of what may have been when they finally heard his true voice. It also offered a new dimension to the intricate tale of music's sound. The movie won 5 Oscars, grossed around $300 million at the box office, and became a global success despite Plummer's constant resistance. A lot of money for the period. And whether he wanted it or not, Christopher Plummer's legacy will always include The Sound of Music. The Sound of Music conjures up images of Maria arriving at the Grand Von Trapp estate in 1938, when she fell in love with 7 naughty children and their strict father. However, the narrative was somewhat different in real life. In 1926, not 1938, Maria Kuchera made her first appearance at the Von Trapp residence. She also didn't end up being a governess to 7 kids. Maria Franziska, a little girl recuperating from scarlet fever, was the only youngster she was expected to instruct. Already, the family had experienced heartache prior to the arrival of Maria. Just 4 years prior, in 1922, Georg von Trapp's first wife, Agatha Whitehead, had passed away from a similar sickness to the one that had afflicted their daughter. Maria was only 22 years old, and Georg was 47 when they were married at Nonnberg Abbey on November 26, 1927. They were 25 years apart in age. You would never believe, however, that Maria and Georg had been married for 11 years, had 2 girls of their own, and were expecting a 3rd child at the time of the Nazi takeover of Austria in 1938. And the film's adorable wide-eyed teen, lies. In actuality, Rupert, the eldest Von Trapp kid, was an adult who was already a licensed doctor. Even the romantic tale that captivated millions of people wasn't entirely accurate. When Maria married Georg, she acknowledged that she wasn't in love with him. She stated that she was not in love, to use her own words. "I didn't adore him, but I did like him. I did, however, adore the kids." She had no desire to marry a captain. Becoming a nun had been her dream. Maria was so uncertain about Georg's proposal that she hurried back to Nonnberg Abbey for guidance. She was informed by Mother Abbess that her marriage to him was God's will. Maria subsequently said that because her heart had been set on a different life, she was upset with Georg and God on her wedding day. It wasn't romance that persuaded her. Instead of asking her for her hand in marriage, Georg requested her to be a second mother to his children. There was no glitzy love triangle, and she thought she may have answered no if he had asked in any other way. Princess Yvonne, a real lady, served as the inspiration for the Baroness's role in the film. She had no desire to raise a large family. After she married Gedior, she intended to send the Von Trapp kids to residential schools. The princess fled, but not in silence. After learning that Gedior had affections for Maria, she was accused of spreading a malicious rumor that Georg had gotten Maria pregnant before they were married. Hollywood wisely avoided including this sensational claim in the show. The spectacular mountainside escape into Switzerland that everyone recalls from the film never occurred. Maria joked that they would have entered Nazi Germany directly if they had attempted to ascend the Alps outside of Salzburg, not far from it. In actuality, the von Trapps just took their backpacks to the nearby train station, got on a train, and discreetly left Austria while posing as a family vacation. No climbing peaks, no nocturnal pursuit, and no dramatic music. They were also fortunate. They departed the day before Austria's borders were blocked by the Nazis. Later, someone took over their house, was utilized by Heinrich Himmler, one of the leading Nazi commanders, as a vacation home. The family left Italy for London, and then set sail for America, arriving in September 1939 with very little. The majority of their wealth had been destroyed in a financial crisis in 1935. They performed as the Trapp family singers on tour in America, before settling in Vermont, where the family established a resort that is still in operation today. However, the film omitted even more unsettling facts. The music created a gentle, even fantastical, portrayal of Nazi-ruled Austria. The Nazis are primarily shown as foolish villains, akin to cartoon antagonists. The Anschluss, in which Nazi Germany seized Austria, is mostly portrayed as a challenge to the von Trapp's freedom, ignoring the true horrors of the Nazi regime, the terror, the persecution, and the suffering. There is never any mention of what happened to the Jews and other victims. Even the nuns' removal of the Nazis' automobile's ignition plugs comes off as a cunning prank rather than the desperate deed it would have been. American viewers found it easier to accept the film in its sanitized form throughout the Cold War, without posing difficult queries regarding Austria's actual involvement in the conflict. It reduced the narrative to a straightforward conflict between good and evil. In actuality, Austria was more than simply a Nazi victim. Hitler was warmly received by many Austrians, and certain members of the populace actively participated in Nazi atrocities. When the filmmakers traveled to Salzburg to shoot, they encountered that issue. Local authorities resisted their attempts to film the Nazi scenes by hanging swastika flags across the ancient city. They wished to see such despised emblems removed from their streets. Robert Wise, the director, threatened to utilize real video of Hitler's visit to Salzburg, which featured Nazi salutes and applauding crowds. The officials conceded and permitted the flags in response to that threat, but only under very specific guidelines. At daybreak, they shot, expecting the majority wouldn't notice. Nevertheless, several residents were clearly shaken when they spotted the swastikas and woke up early. The wounds from that period had not been healed. Beyond that, there was a political undertone to the music that hardly everyone noticed. In the 1930s, the actual Captain von Trapp represented Austria's peculiar political identity. Austria was not a democracy at the time. The government of this totalitarian state not only detested the Nazis, but also ruthlessly persecuted its own citizens. The White Cross necklace that Georg von Trapp wore was more than just a Christian emblem. It represented the nationalist notion that Austria was the superior Catholic Germany. Although the movie portrays Austria as being full of honorable traditional conservative heroes, the reality was more complicated. Hitler's ideals were favored by many Austrians. Others resisted because they had their own kind of authoritarian leadership, not because they supported democracy and freedom. Nobody could have predicted how popular The Sound of Music would become when it debuted in theaters on March 2, 1965. With a mere $8.2 million in funding, it not only succeeded but exceeded all expectations. It accomplished an incredible feat by November 1966. It surpassed Gone with the Wind to become the highest-grossing movie ever, a position it maintained for 5 years in a row. The figures were astounding. It made more than $286 million worldwide. It was the first picture to ever make over $100 million, something that had never been done before. The figures get even more absurd when inflation is taken into account. In current currency, it made almost $2.366 billion. It remains triumphantly at number 3 on U.S. charts that account for inflation, trailing only the original Star Wars and Gone with the Wind. In several cities, the number of tickets sold by theaters exceeded the total population. It was a sensation rather than merely a hit, but not everyone had success right away. Some critics detested the film when it debuted at the Rivoli Theater in New York. It was particularly dismantled by East Coast authors. The New York Times' Bosley Crowther referred to it as romantic gibberish. According to Judith Christ of the New York Herald Tribune, it was designed exclusively for young children and their mothers. Pauline Kael went even farther, claiming that viewers had grown emotionally and artistically deranged, and that it was a sugar-coated falsehood. Outside of the large cities, people adored it despite its harshness. It was appreciated by local newspapers and film industry journals. The Los Angeles Times' Philip K. Schutter described it as hours of visual and vocal brilliance. Variety called it engaging and wonderfully pulsing. The big fancy critics detested them, director Robert Wise subsequently remarked. However, the movie's message was clear to both trade writers and the general public. Richard Rodgers, the composer, also supported the movie. He noted that while too many flowers and hearts may make individuals feel ashamed, expressing genuine feelings is perfectly acceptable. History eventually took the side of the supporters, with an 83% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes. The Sound of Music is still becoming more and more well-known. The accolades poured in. The Sound of Music won 5 Oscars at the 38th Academy Awards in 1966, including Best Picture and Best Director for Robert Wise. Additionally, it took home the Best Sound, Best Music Scoring, and Best Film Editing awards. With Julie Andrews nominated for Best Actress and Peggy Wood for Best Supporting Actress, the movie garnered a total of 10 Oscar nominations. It was also honored by the Golden Globes, where Julie Andrews won Best Actress and Best Motion Picture, Comedy or Musical. The film's impact continued when the Directors Guild and Writers Guild presented additional honors in recognition of the film's superb directing and writing. The Sound of Music was designated as culturally, historically, or aesthetically important by the U.S. Library of Congress, which added it to the National Film Registry in 2001. Then, in recognition of its outstanding musical accomplishment, the movie's soundtrack was entered into the National Recording Registry in 2017. It is now ranked as the 4th best film musical of all time and the 55th greatest American film ever produced by the American Film Institute.